The Alpha who rejected her stands before the Lycan King, begging for aid. His pack is crumbling, but then his eyes land on the council member sitting at the king's right hand, the rejected Omega he discarded 18 months ago. Now she holds his pack's fate in her hands. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The cold stone floor bit into Alara's knees, but she barely felt it anymore. Pain had become background noise over the past hour, drowned out by the whispers echoing through the ceremonial hall. Hundreds of wolves watched her kneel at the center of the ancient circle, their eyes gleaming with something between pity and anticipation. They had come for a mating ceremony. Instead, they were getting a spectacle. Caden Ashford stood before her in his ceremonial robes, every inch the perfect alpha that the Silver Moon Pack had groomed him to be. Strong jaw, broad shoulders, eyes the color of amber that had once looked at her with something she had mistaken for affection. Now those eyes held nothing but cold calculation as he prepared to speak the words that would shatter her world. The worst part was that Alara had seen this coming. Not the specific moment, not this exact betrayal, but the general shape of her own irrelevance. She was an Omega from a family with no political connections, no special bloodline, no strategic value. Caden was destined to lead Silver Moon into a new era of power and prosperity. Everyone had always said they made an odd match. She just hadn't wanted to believe it mattered. Caden cleared his throat, and the whispers died instantly. The hall fell so silent that Alara could hear her own heartbeat, a desperate rhythm that seemed to be counting down to something terrible. I, Caden Ashford, future alpha of the Silver Moon Pack, stand before the Moon Goddess and this gathering of witnesses to speak truth. His voice carried across the ceremonial space with practiced authority. The Omega before me, Alara Morwen, was intended as my mate through arrangement made by our families when we were children. However, traditions must sometimes yield to necessity. The pack requires strength. It requires strategic alliances. It requires a Luna who can elevate our standing among the great packs of the Northern Territories. Alara felt something crack inside her chest. This wasn't just rejection. This was systematic dismantling of her worth in front of everyone she had ever known. Alara Morwen cannot provide what Silver Moon needs, Caden continued, his tone almost apologetic, as if that made it better. She is kind, yes, gentle and caring, but these qualities, while admirable in an Omega, are insufficient for the demands of leadership. Our pack faces threats from rogues in the Eastern Territories. We need alliances with stronger packs. We need a Luna who brings resources, connections, power. He paused, letting his words sink into every corner of the hall. Alara could feel the agreement rippling through the crowd. They had all thought it. He was just saying it out loud. Therefore, I reject this mating bond. I reject Alara Morwen as my intended mate. I release her from all obligations to me and to this arrangement. May the Moon Goddess bear witness that this rejection is made not from cruelty, but from duty to pack and purpose. The formal words hit like physical blows. Alara gasped as the half-formed bond between them, the connection they had been building toward for years, began to tear itself apart. It felt like something vital was being ripped from her chest, leaving a wound that throbbed with each heartbeat. She had known this would hurt. She hadn't known it would feel like dying. Around her, the pack members who had gathered for a celebration began to murmur. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked satisfied, as if they had always known this would happen and were pleased to be proven right. A few actually laughed quiet sounds of derision that cut deeper than any formal rejection could. Elara forced herself to breathe through the pain, to maintain some shred of dignity, even as everything fell apart. She would not beg. She would not cry in front of these wolves who had never valued her anyway. She would endure this, and then she would figure out what came next. But Caden wasn't finished. He turned toward the crowd, and Elara saw her standing there in the front row. Lyanna Silverbrook, daughter of the Silverbrook Pax Alpha, a woman with silver blonde hair and ice blue eyes who radiated the kind of power that made other wolves take notice. She wore a dress of midnight blue that probably cost more than Elara's family earned in a year, and she looked at Caden with open satisfaction. In accordance with pack law and with the blessing of both our families, Caden announced, "I hereby declare my intention to mate with Lyanna Silverbrook. She brings to Silvermoon the alliance we need, the strength we require, and the leadership qualities essential for our future. The ceremony will take place 1 month from today, and all are invited to witness the union that will elevate our pack to its rightful place among the great powers of the North." The crowd erupted in approval. Cheers and howls of celebration filled the ceremonial hall, drowning out any objection that might have been raised. Not that anyone would object. This was clearly what everyone wanted, what everyone had been waiting for. Elara remained kneeling on the stone floor, forgotten already as wolves surged forward to congratulate Caden and Lyanna. The pain in her chest had evolved from sharp agony into a dull, persistent ache that she suspected would never fully heal. The bond that had been forming between her and Caden was severed now, leaving ragged edges that throbbed with each breath. Someone touched her shoulder, and Elara looked up to find her younger sister, Mira, standing beside her with tears streaming down her face. "Come on," Mira whispered, helping Elara to her feet. "Let's get you out of here." They made their way through the celebrating crowd, invisible to wolves too focused on the new power couple to notice the rejected Omega slipping away. No one tried to stop them. No one offered condolences. Elara and Mira might as well have been ghosts for all the attention they received. Outside, the night air hit Elara's face like a slap, cold and sharp and somehow clarifying. She had spent years preparing for a life as Caden's mate, molding herself into what she thought he needed, ignoring every warning sign that she wasn't enough. And now she was free of that delusion, free of the pretense that love mattered more than power. "What are you going to do?" Mira asked as they walked toward the small cottage where their family lived on the edge of pack territory. Elara didn't have an answer. Rejected Omegas didn't have many options. Most packs wouldn't accept someone who had been publicly cast aside. The stigma was too strong, the assumption being that if your intended mate didn't want you, something fundamental was wrong with you. "I don't know," Elara admitted finally, "but I can't stay here. I can't watch him mate with her. I can't live in this pack knowing that everyone sees me as the Omega who wasn't good enough." "You could go to Aunt Thessaly," Mira suggested. "She lives in the Wildwood territory. It's neutral ground, no pack politics. Their aunt was a healer who had chosen to live outside pack structure, serving whoever needed her services regardless of affiliation. It was a lonely life, but at least it was free from the constant judgment of pack hierarchies." "Maybe," Elara said, though the thought of running to her aunt felt like admitting defeat, like confirming that she was too weak to survive on her own. They reached the cottage to find their mother waiting on the porch, her face etched with worry. She had argued against the mating arrangement from the beginning, had warned that Caden's family was too ambitious, too focused on status. Elara hadn't listened. She had thought love could overcome political reality. "I heard," her mother said simply, pulling Alara into a fierce embrace. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry you had to endure that." And that was when Alara finally let herself cry, sobbing into her mother's shoulder as years of hope and planning crumbled into ash. She cried for the future she had envisioned, for the naive girl who had believed that being kind and caring would be enough, for the reality that power and politics always won in the end. But underneath the grief, something else was growing, something harder and sharper: anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly, but cold fury that settles into your bones and changes you from the inside out. Caden had rejected her in front of hundreds of witnesses. He had systematically dismantled her worth to justify his own ambition. He had taught her a lesson about how the world really worked. Fine, she had learned it, and someday, somehow, she would make sure he regretted teaching her that lesson so thoroughly. 3 days later, Alara packed what little she owned and prepared to leave Silvermoon territory. Her mother had tried to convince her to stay, to weather the scandal, and rebuild her life within the pack. But Alara knew that was impossible. Every wolf in Silvermoon had witnessed her humiliation. She would forever be the Omega who wasn't good enough, the cautionary tale about wolves who reached beyond their station. Mira helped her load supplies into a small pack, moving with the careful gentleness of someone trying not to shatter something already broken. "Promise me you'll write," Mira said, her voice thick with tears. "Promise me you'll let us know you're safe." "I promise," Alara replied, though she wasn't certain she could keep that promise. Where she was going, safety wasn't guaranteed. She had decided against going to Aunt Thessaly. That felt too much like running home to hide. Instead, Alara was heading north, toward the Frost Peak Mountains, where the most ancient wolf territories existed. Territories that operated under old laws, where power was earned through skill and survival, rather than inherited through bloodlines. If she could make it there, if she could prove herself capable, maybe she could build a new life away from pack politics and mating bonds, and the constant reminder of her own inadequacy. The journey would take weeks, maybe months. She would have to cross neutral wilderness where rogues hunted and wild beasts roamed. She had minimal survival training and even less experience traveling alone. But the alternative was staying in Silvermoon, watching Caden build his perfect life with his perfect mate, slowly suffocating under the weight of everyone's pity and judgment. Death in the wilderness seemed preferable to death by 1,000 small humiliations. As Alara reached the border of Silvermoon territory, she paused to look back one last time. The pack land stretched behind her, familiar and safe, and forever close to her now. Somewhere in that territory, Caden was probably celebrating with Lyanna, planning their future, never sparing a thought for the Omega he had discarded. Good. Let him forget her. Let them all forget her. She would become someone new in the north, someone who didn't need mating bonds or pack approval or anything except her own strength and determination. Alara turned her back on Silvermoon and walked into the wilderness, every step taking her further from who she had been and closer to who she might become. The first week of travel was brutal. Alara quickly discovered that survival in neutral territory required skills she had never needed within the safety of a pack. Finding clean water, building adequate shelter, identifying which plants were safe to eat. These were challenges she faced with only her wits and whatever knowledge she had absorbed from watching others. She made mistakes. She drank from a stream that made her violently ill for 2 days. She tried to start a fire with damp wood and nearly froze when it wouldn't catch. She walked into territory claimed by a family of bears and had to climb a tree to escape their aggressive defense of their den. But she survived. Each mistake taught her something. Each night, she managed to build a fire felt like a small victory. Each morning she woke up still breathing was proof that maybe, just maybe, she was stronger than anyone had given her credit for. On the 10th day of her journey, everything changed. Elara was following a game trail through dense forest, hoping it would lead to water, when she heard the sounds of a fight. Snarling, the clash of bodies, the unmistakable scent of blood and violence. Every instinct told her to hide, to avoid whatever conflict was happening just beyond the tree line. But then she heard something else, a child scream, high and terrified. Elara ran toward the sound before rational thought could stop her. She burst through the underbrush into a small clearing and immediately understood what she was seeing. 3 rogue wolves in their animal forms had cornered a young boy, maybe 8 years old, who pressed himself against a boulder with nowhere left to run. The rogues were playing with him, taking turns lunging close enough to make him scream before backing off, savoring his terror. She should have kept moving. This wasn't her fight. This wasn't her pack. Getting involved would only put her in danger. But looking at that terrified child, Elara saw herself 3 nights ago, kneeling on cold stone while wolves circled and judged. She had been powerless then. She didn't have to be powerless now. Elara grabbed a fallen branch, thick and heavy enough to serve as a weapon. She stepped into the clearing, placing herself between the rogues and the boy. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The 3 rogues turned to look at her. They shifted into human form, revealing 3 males with the lean, scarred look of wolves who survived outside pack law. Their eyes assessed her with predatory interest. "Well, well," the largest one said, grinning to show teeth filed to points. "What do we have here? Another little Omega wandering where she doesn't belong." "I belong wherever I choose to be," Elara replied, gripping her makeshift weapon. "And I'm choosing to tell you to leave this child alone and walk away." The rogues laughed. Actually laughed at her, as if the idea of an Omega threatening them was the funniest thing they had heard all week. "You don't give us orders, little wolf," another rogue said, moving to flank her. "But we appreciate the offer. 2 prizes are better than 1. They attacked simultaneously, coordinated and fast. Elara swung her branch at the closest rogue, connecting with his ribs hard enough to make him grunt. But the second one grabbed the weapon and yanked it from her hands, while the third moved toward the boy. Elara didn't think. She shifted, letting her wolf form take over even, though she had always been told her Omega wolf was weak and useless. She threw herself at the rogue approaching the child, teeth bared, aiming for his throat. She missed. Her inexperience showed in every movement. But she was desperate, and desperate wolves fight with the ferocity of those who have nothing left to lose. She bit and clawed and used every bit of strength her Omega form possessed, fighting with the fury of 5 years of being told she wasn't enough. And then, suddenly, the fight was over. One moment Elara was locked in combat with the rogues. The next, a massive silver wolf appeared seemingly from nowhere, moving with lethal grace and devastating power. It tore into the rogues with precision that spoke of extensive combat training, dispatching all 3 within seconds. Elara backed away, positioning herself protectively in front of the child as she watched this new arrival. The silver wolf was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, and it radiated power in waves that made her Omega nature want to submit immediately. The wolf shifted into human form, and Alara found herself staring at a man who looked like he had stepped out of legends. Tall and powerfully built with silver hair and eyes that gleamed like molten metal. He wore clothing that suggested wealth and status. But more than that, he carried himself with the kind of authority that made alpha wolves bow. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle given the violence he had just displayed. "We're fine," Alara managed, still catching her breath. "Thank you for intervening." The man's eyes swept over her, assessing, and Alara had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing more than just her physical state. He was reading her strength, her desperation, her determination. "You fought well for an Omega," he said finally, "untrained, but brave. What pack do you belong to?" "None," Alara said, lifting her chin. "I'm a rogue." His eyebrows rose. "By choice?" "By necessity," she corrected. "My pack had no further use for me." Understanding flickered in his silver eyes. "Rejected, then?" "Recently, judging by the anger that's still driving you forward." Alara wanted to deny it, to maintain some pretense of pride, but there seemed little point in lying to someone who had just saved her life. 10 days ago, she admitted, in front of hundreds of witnesses, my intended mate decided I wasn't good enough to be his Luna, so he rejected me and immediately announced his mating to someone with better political connections. The man studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a slow curve of his lips that suggested he found something amusing in her situation. "Your former mate was a fool," he said simply. "Political connections mean nothing if you don't have the strength to back them up. You just proved you have that strength by throwing yourself between rogues and a child you didn't even know. That's worth more than all the bloodline advantages in the world." The unexpected praise made Alara's throat tight. No one had ever suggested that her actions had value. No one had ever looked at her and seen strength instead of weakness. The child she had been protecting finally emerged from behind her, moving toward the silver-haired man with obvious familiarity. "Uncle Theron," the boy said, his voice still shaky from fear. "They were going to kill me." "I know, Kieran," the man replied, pulling the child into a protective embrace. "But you're safe now, and we have this brave Omega to thank for keeping you alive until I arrived." He looked at Alara over the boy's head. "I am Theron Stormcrown, Lycan King of the Northern Territories. This is my nephew, Kieran, who apparently wandered too far from our patrol group. I owe you a debt for protecting him." Lycan King. Alara felt her blood run cold. She had just been saved by one of the most powerful wolves in existence. The Lycan King ruled over all the northern packs, a position of such immense authority that most wolves went their entire lives without ever seeing him in person. "You don't owe me anything," Alara said quickly. "I just did what anyone would do. You did what you believed was right despite being outmatched and untrained," Theron corrected. "That's not what anyone would do. That's what someone with true courage does." He set his nephew aside and stepped closer to Alara, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body and smell the scent of winter pine and ancient power. "Where were you traveling when you encountered my nephew?" "North," Alara said, "toward the Frost Peak territories. I heard they honor skill over bloodlines there." "They do," Theron confirmed. "But the journey is treacherous for a lone Omega. You'll likely die before you reach the mountains." "Then I'll die," Alara said with more confidence than she felt. "It's better than living as a rejected Omega in a pack that never wanted me." "What if I offered you an alternative?" Theron asked, his silver eyes intense on hers. "What if I offered you a place in my territory, training, protection, a chance to become someone new?" Alara's heart began to race. Why would you do that? You don't know anything about me. I know you risked your life to save a child who wasn't your pack, wasn't your family, wasn't your responsibility. Theron's voice carried absolute conviction. I know you fought 3 rogues despite having no real combat training because you couldn't stand by and watch someone suffer. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The rest, skills and strength and knowledge, those can be taught. He held out his hand. Come with me, Alara. Join my territory. Learn to be the wolf you were meant to be before rejection and pack politics tried to crush your spirit. I think you might surprise yourself with what you're capable of. And standing there in the wilderness, covered in dirt and blood, exhausted and hurt and still burning with the humiliation of her rejection, Alara looked at the hand extended toward her and made a choice. Not the safe choice, not the expected choice, but the choice that felt like stepping toward something that might, just possibly, lead to becoming someone worth being. She took Theron's hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm and steady. And for the first time since Caden had rejected her on that cold stone floor, Alara felt something other than pain and anger. She felt possibility. The journey to Theron's territory took 3 days, but it felt nothing like the desperate wandering that had preceded it. The Lycan King traveled with a small group of elite guards who moved through the wilderness with the confidence of wolves who feared nothing. Young Kieran stayed close to his uncle, chattering about everything he saw with the resilience of children who recover quickly from trauma. Alara walked among them, still somewhat dazed by the turn her life had taken. 10 days ago, she had been kneeling in humiliation. 3 days ago, she had been prepared to die alone in the wilderness. Now she was traveling with the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, heading toward something she couldn't quite name, but desperately needed. Theron seemed content to let her process in silence, though occasionally she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't interpret. Assessing her, perhaps. Wondering if he had made a mistake by offering sanctuary to a rejected Omega with no skills and no value. On the second night, as they made camp in a sheltered valley, Kieran approached Alara with the directness of youth. "Why did your pack reject you?" he asked, settling beside the fire where she was attempting to help prepare their evening meal. "My uncle says you saved my life, but you must have done something really bad for your whole pack to not want you anymore." "Kieran," Theron's voice carried warning, "that's not appropriate." "It's all right," Alara said quietly. "It's a fair question." She looked at the boy, this child who had seen her at her most desperate and still thought she was worth talking to, and decided he deserved honesty. "I didn't do anything bad," she explained, "but I also didn't do anything particularly good. I was just ordinary, an Omega from a family with no special bloodline, no political connections, no power. My intended mate was destined to be an alpha, and he needed someone who could help him build alliances and strengthen his pack. I couldn't offer him that, so he rejected me in front of everyone and chose someone who could." "That's stupid," Kieran declared with the absolute certainty of an 8-year-old. "You saved my life. That's way better than having stupid political connections." "I agree," Theron said, moving to join them by the fire. "Political connections are worthless if you don't have the character to use them wisely. Your former mate will learn that lesson eventually, though probably too late to do him any good." "You really think so?" Alara asked, hating how much she wanted his words to be true. "I know so," Theron replied. "I've ruled the Northern Territories for over a century. I've seen countless wolves rise and fall based on the choices they make. Leaders who value status over substance always eventually crumble under the weight of their own ambition. Leaders who understand that true strength comes from character, from loyalty, from the willingness to sacrifice for others. Those are the ones who build legacies that last. He settled onto a log across from her, his silver eyes reflecting the firelight. You threw yourself between rogues and a child you didn't know. You had no training, no backup, no reason to believe you would survive. But you did it anyway, because you couldn't stand by and watch someone suffer. That's the mark of a true leader, Ilara. That's the kind of strength that changes worlds. I'm not a leader, Ilara protested. I'm just an Omega who made an impulsive decision. You're a wolf who will be trained to recognize her own value, Theron countered. And once you understand what you're truly capable of, I suspect you'll be unstoppable. The conviction in his voice made something in Ilara's chest warm. He believed what he was saying. He genuinely thought she had potential worth developing. It was so different from the constant dismissal she had experienced in Silvermoon that she barely knew how to process it. "What happens when we reach your territory?" she asked, changing the subject before the emotion building in her throat could escape. "What exactly are you offering me?" "Training, first and foremost. You'll work with my best combat instructors to develop fighting skills. You'll learn strategy, pack dynamics, the politics that govern our world. You'll study with healers to understand wolf physiology, and with historians to learn the old ways that most modern packs have forgotten." Theron leaned forward, his intensity making it clear how serious he was. "And while you're learning all of this, you'll have time to heal from your rejection, time to figure out who you are when you're not trying to meet someone else's expectations, time to become the wolf you were always meant to be." "And what do you get out of this?" Ilara asked. "You're offering me everything. What do I owe you in return?" "Nothing," Theron said simply. "This isn't a transaction. This is an investment in potential. I believe you have something valuable to offer the world, and I want to see what happens when you're given the resources to develop it. If you choose to stay in my territory after your training, excellent. If you choose to leave and build your own path, equally excellent. Either way, the Northern Territories benefit from having another strong wolf in them." One of the guards, a scarred female alpha named Seren, spoke up from where she was sharpening her blade. "The king doesn't waste resources on wolves who don't deserve them. If he's offering you this opportunity, it's because he sees something worth nurturing. Don't question it. Just take advantage of it and prove him right." The journey continued the next morning, and as they drew closer to Theron's territory, Ilara began to see signs of the Lycan King's influence. Patrols moved through the wilderness with military precision. Border markers were well maintained. Even the wildlife seemed healthier, more abundant, suggesting careful management of the ecosystem. On the afternoon of the third day, they crested a ridge, and Ilara got her first view of Storm Crown Hold. It wasn't a fortress. It was a city, built into and around a massive mountain, with structures that seemed to grow from the stone itself, connected by bridges and walkways that created a three-dimensional maze of architecture and nature intertwined. Thousands of wolves lived here, Ilara realized. This wasn't just a pack territory. This was the seat of power for the entire northern region. Her courage wavered. What was she doing here? She was a rejected Omega from a minor pack. She had no business being in the presence of such power and authority. She should turn around now before she embarrassed herself further. As if sensing her thoughts, Theron appeared beside her. "Second thoughts?" "About 100 of them," Ilara admitted. "That's reasonable," he said. "This is overwhelming." "But Ilara, I need you to understand something. Everyone in that city below us came from somewhere else. Every guard, every advisor, every wolf who now calls Stormcrown home was once a stranger looking at these walls and wondering if they belonged. The only difference between them and you is that they took the chance to find out. He turned to face her directly. You saved my nephew's life. You fought rogues despite having no training and no hope of victory. You've survived rejection, banishment, and a week of wilderness travel with nothing but determination, keeping you alive. You have already proven you belong here. Now you just need to believe it yourself. The warmth in his voice, the absolute certainty, made Alara's throat tight with emotion. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever suggested that her struggles were proof of strength rather than weakness. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I'll try. That's all I ask, Theron replied with a smile. They descended into the city as evening fell, and Alara was immediately struck by the diversity of wolves moving through the streets. Different sizes, different colorings, different energy levels and social rankings, all coexisting without the rigid hierarchy she was used to in Silvermoon. Omegas walked beside alphas without deference, warriors trained alongside scholars. It was chaotic and beautiful, and completely unlike anything she had ever experienced. Theron led her through winding streets to a residential section built into the mountainside where individual dwellings looked out over the valley below. He stopped in front of a modest but comfortable-looking home carved directly into the stone. This is yours, he said. For as long as you want it. It's furnished with basics, but you're free to modify it however you like. The training grounds are 2 levels down, the library is 3 levels up, and the market square is in the center if you need anything. Alara stared at the dwelling in disbelief. This is mine? Just like that? Just like that, Theron confirmed. Tomorrow morning someone will come to take you to the training grounds and introduce you to your instructors. But tonight, rest, recover. Begin to let yourself believe that this is real. He started to leave, then paused. Alara, one more thing. You're going to hear stories about me. Some of them will be true. I am the Lycan King, and I didn't earn that title by being soft or forgiving. I've made hard decisions and lived with brutal consequences. But everything I do is in service of creating a world where wolves like you, wolves with potential that others are too blind to see, have a chance to become who they're meant to be. Remember that when the training gets difficult and you start to doubt whether you belong here. With that, he was gone, disappearing into the evening crowds with Kieran and his guards, leaving Alara standing in front of a home she hadn't earned and a future she couldn't quite believe in. She entered the dwelling slowly, almost afraid it would disappear if she moved too quickly. The interior was simple but well made, with a sleeping area, a small kitchen, and windows that overlooked the city lights beginning to glow in the darkness. It was more than she had ever had in Silvermoon, where she had shared a cramped cottage with her family. Alara sank onto the bed, her body finally acknowledging how exhausted she was from days of travel. As she lay there, staring at the ceiling of her new home, she tried to process everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, she had been preparing for a mating ceremony. 1 week ago, she had been publicly humiliated and banished. 3 days ago, she had been ready to die in the wilderness. Now she was in the city of the Lycan King himself, with promises of training and purpose and a chance to become someone new. It felt like a dream. It felt like a trap. It felt like the first genuine opportunity she had ever been offered. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone who has survived something they shouldn't have and needs to recover before the next challenge arrives. Training began at dawn. Alara was woken by a sharp knock on her door and opened it to find Seren, the scarred Alpha guard from their journey, standing in the hallway with an expression that suggested she did not appreciate being assigned to escort duty. "You have 10 minutes to dress and meet me outside," Seren said without preamble. "Wear something you don't mind destroying. Training isn't gentle here." Alara scrambled to comply, throwing on the simple training clothes that had been left folded on a chair, and met Serene in the street, exactly 10 minutes later. The Alpha gave her an approving nod. "At least you follow instructions. That's a start. Come on, we're already late." They descended through the city to the training grounds, a massive complex built into a natural amphitheater in the mountainside. Even at this early hour, it was crowded with wolves engaged in various forms of combat training, sparring matches, endurance runs, and tactical exercises. Seren led Alara to a section where a group of younger wolves were practicing basic forms under the watchful eye of an older male instructor with graying hair and a presence that commanded immediate respect. Commander Torin, Seren called, the king's newest project. The instructor's eyes swept over Alara with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. Rejected Omega from Silver Moon Pack, no formal combat training, fought 3 rogues to protect the king's nephew and survived. That about sum it up? "Yes, sir," Alara managed. "Don't call me sir. Call me Torin, and don't look so terrified. Everyone here started somewhere. You're just starting a bit further behind than most." He gestured to the other students. "You'll train with this group. They're all learning fundamentals. Some are young wolves just coming of age. Others are like you, older wolves who never received proper instruction. No one here will judge you for not knowing things. They will judge you if you don't put in the effort to learn." Over the following weeks, Alara discovered that Torin's warning about training not being gentle was a massive understatement. She was pushed harder than she had ever been pushed in her life. Combat drills that left her bruised and bleeding. Endurance runs that had her vomiting from exhaustion. Strategic exercises that revealed just how little she understood about pack dynamics and territorial politics. But she also discovered something else. She was good at this. Not immediately, not without tremendous effort, but with each passing day she got stronger, faster, more capable. The Omega Wolf that everyone in Silver Moon had dismissed as weak was developing into something formidable. Torin was a merciless instructor, but he was also fair. When Alara executed a move correctly, he acknowledged it. When she failed, he explained what went wrong and made her practice until she got it right. And slowly, painfully, she began to understand that maybe Theron had been right. Maybe she did have potential that others had been too blind to see. 3 months into her training, everything shifted again. Alara was sparring with another student, a young alpha male named Ren, who had quickly become her primary training partner. They were evenly matched now, after weeks of her learning to compensate for his superior strength, with better technique and strategy. The match was intense, both of them pushing each other to their limits, and then Alara felt it, a presence, watching from the edge of the training grounds. She glanced up and saw Theron standing there, with several members of his council, observing the training session. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. Recognition, acknowledgement, something that made Ilara's heart skip a beat. She lost focus for just a moment, and Ren took advantage, sweeping her legs and pinning her to the mat. "Dead," Torin called out. "You let yourself get distracted, Alara. In a real fight, that distraction would have cost you your life." Alara accepted the criticism and pushed herself back to her feet, but she could still feel Theron's gaze on her. When the training session ended, she was surprised to find him waiting near the exit. "Walk with me," he said simply. They walked through the city in silence for several minutes before Theron finally spoke. "You've made remarkable progress. Torin tells me you're one of his most dedicated students." "I'm trying," Alara said. "I don't want to waste the opportunity you've given me. You're not wasting anything. But I've been watching your training, and I think you're ready for the next phase." "Next phase?" Theron led her to a quieter section of the city, a garden built into the mountainside with flowing water and carefully tended plants. "You've learned the basics of combat and strategy. Now you need to learn what it means to lead, to make decisions that affect more than just yourself, to understand the weight of responsibility that comes with power." He turned to face her fully. "I want you to join my council, not as a full member yet, but as an apprentice. You'll observe our meetings, learn how we govern, understand the complexities of ruling multiple packs with different needs and priorities. And over time, if you prove yourself capable, you'll take on more responsibility." Alara felt her breath catch. "Me? On your council? I'm nobody. I'm a rejected Omega who's only been here 3 months. You're a wolf who saved my nephew's life without hesitation, who has trained harder than anyone I've seen in years, who has the courage to walk away from everything familiar and build something new." Theron's voice was firm. "That's not nobody, Alara. That's exactly the kind of wolf I need advising me. But the other council members will never accept me. They'll see me as the rejected Omega playing at being important. Let me worry about the council. Your job is to learn, to grow, to become the leader I know you can be." And that was how Alara found herself sitting in on council meetings, listening to debates about territorial disputes and resource allocation and diplomatic relations with southern packs. At first, she said nothing, just observed and learned. But gradually, as she began to understand the patterns in politics, she started offering suggestions. Small things at first, perspectives that others hadn't considered, solutions that addressed underlying problems rather than just symptoms. The council members were skeptical at first, some openly dismissive of the Omega who presumed to offer opinions. But Theron consistently supported her contributions, and slowly, grudgingly, the others began to see that she had value to offer. 6 months passed, then a year. Alara's transformation was so gradual that she barely noticed it happening until she caught sight of herself in a mirror one day and didn't recognize the wolf staring back. She was leaner, harder, her body shaped by endless training. But more than that, she carried herself differently, with confidence, with purpose, with the quiet certainty of someone who knew their own worth. She had become a full member of Theron's council, respected for her insight and valued for her perspective. She had friends among the guards and instructors. She had a home and a purpose and a life that felt real in ways her existence in Silvermoon never had. And through it all, her relationship with Theron had deepened into something she couldn't quite name. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing. He sought her counsel on difficult decisions. She challenged his assumptions and made him reconsider positions he'd held for decades. There was trust between them, and respect, and something else that neither of them had acknowledged out loud, until the day the messenger arrived from Silvermoon. Alara was in the council chamber when the wolf was announced, a formal delegation from the Silvermoon Pack requesting an audience with the Lycan King on a matter of urgent territorial importance. Her blood ran cold. Silvermoon, the pack that had rejected her, the wolves who had watched her humiliation and done nothing. After 18 months of building a new life, her past was suddenly standing on her doorstep, demanding attention. Theron's eyes found hers across the chamber. A silent question. She nodded slightly. She could handle this. She had to handle this. The delegation was shown in, and Alara felt her stomach drop. There, at the head of the group, stood Caden Ashford, her former intended mate, the alpha who had rejected her in front of hundreds of witnesses. He looked different, older somehow, though only 18 months had passed. There were shadows under his eyes and new lines around his mouth. He wore his authority like a coat that didn't quite fit anymore, and when his gaze swept the council chamber and landed on Alara, she saw shock flash across his face. He hadn't expected to see her here, hadn't expected the rejected Omega to be sitting at the Lycan King's right hand, dressed in the formal robes of a council member, looking at him with the cool assessment of someone who held power. Theron's voice cut through the tension. "Welcome to Stormcrown Hold. I am told you bring urgent matters for discussion." Caden seemed to struggle to find his voice. "Your Majesty, we come seeking aid. The Silver Moon Pack faces a crisis that threatens our very survival." "Explain." Caden glanced at Alara again, clearly thrown by her presence, then forced himself to focus on Theron. "The alliance I formed through my mating, the union with the Silverbrook Pack, it has collapsed. Lyanna Silverbrook and her family have withdrawn their support and are now actively working to undermine Silvermoon's standing with neighboring packs. We are being isolated, cut off from trade routes and resources. Without intervention from a higher authority, we face potential dissolution. And you expect me to intervene? Why, exactly?" Theron's tone was neutral, but Alara could hear the edge beneath it. "Because the situation affects the stability of the entire northern region. If Silvermoon falls, it creates a power vacuum that could lead to territorial conflicts. As Lycan King, maintaining order is your responsibility." "True." Theron leaned back in his chair. "But there are many ways to maintain order. I could allow Silvermoon to dissolve and absorb your territory directly into the Lycan Crown lands. That would certainly prevent conflict. Your Majesty," Caden's voice took on a desperate edge, "our pack has existed for generations. We have history, traditions, a legacy worth preserving. Do you? Because from what I understand, your pack's most recent tradition involves publicly humiliating wolves who don't meet arbitrary standards of political value, then discarding them without regard for their well-being." The council chamber went silent. Caden's face paled as he realized where this was going. Theron continued, his voice cold. "I have a council member who experienced your pack's hospitality firsthand. Perhaps she should be the one to advise me on whether Silvermoon deserves aid or deserves to face the consequences of its own choices." All eyes turned to Alara. Caden was staring at her with something that looked like horror and recognition combined. The other Silvermoon delegates were whispering among themselves, clearly just now realizing who she was. Alara stood slowly, taking her time, letting the moment stretch. A year and a half ago, she would have been terrified of this confrontation. Now she felt only a cold sense of justice finally arriving. "Alpha Caden," she said, her voice carrying the authority she had earned through months of hard work and dedication. "You stand before this council seeking aid for a crisis of your own making. You chose political alliance over genuine partnership. You chose status over character. And now you're discovering that foundations built on ambition rather than substance tend to crumble when tested." "Alara," Caden started, but she cut him off. "Councilmember Morwen," she corrected sharply. "You lost the right to use my given name when you rejected me in front of hundreds of witnesses, and made it clear that I had no value to your pack. She walked closer, letting him see exactly how much she had changed. You taught me an important lesson that day. You taught me that power and politics matter more than kindness or loyalty in your world. But here's what you failed to understand. True power doesn't come from alliances forged through mating bonds or political maneuvering. It comes from earning the respect and trust of those you lead. It comes from making decisions based on what's right rather than what's advantageous. It comes from recognizing value in unexpected places and nurturing it rather than discarding it. The council chamber was absolutely silent. Even the other council members were watching with rapt attention. You stand here now, Ilara continued, asking for help from the very authority you assumed would never concern itself with a rejected Omega. You're asking me, the wolf you deemed worthless, to advise the Lycan King on whether your pack deserves salvation. The irony is almost too perfect. Caden's face had gone from pale to flushed with shame. Ilara, I made a mistake. I see that now. Please. Ilara let the please hang in the air for a long moment. Then she turned to Theron. Your Majesty, may I speak freely? Always. Silvermoon Pack is weak because its leadership values the wrong things. However, the pack itself contains many wolves who had no say in Alpha Caden's decisions. Wolves who don't deserve to suffer because their leader chose poorly. My recommendation is this: offer aid, but with conditions. Silvermoon must reform its governance structure. It must establish a true council with representatives from all social rankings, not just alphas and betas. It must create protections for omegas and other wolves who are vulnerable to arbitrary rejection or banishment. And Alpha Caden must publicly acknowledge the harm his decisions have caused and commit to a different path forward. She looked directly at Caden. If he's willing to truly change, to build a pack based on the values that actually matter, then Silvermoon might be worth saving. If he's only here seeking a temporary rescue so he can continue ruling the same way he always has, then let the pack dissolve and absorb those wolves who deserve better into territories that will value them properly. Theron's expression was unreadable, but Ilara thought she saw approval in his eyes. A wise recommendation. Alpha Caden, you have heard the terms. What say you? Caden looked at Ilara with an expression that held regret, and something that might have been respect. You're right. About all of it. I chose wrong. I valued things that seemed important in the moment but meant nothing when tested, and I rejected the one wolf who might have actually made me a better leader. He straightened his shoulders. I accept your terms, Your Majesty. I will reform Silvermoon's governance. I will establish protections for all pack members regardless of rank, and I will publicly acknowledge my failures. I only ask that you give me the chance to prove that wolves can learn from their mistakes. Theron looked at Ilara. Do you believe he's sincere? Ilara studied Caden carefully. She could still remember the pain of his rejection, the humiliation of kneeling on that cold stone floor while everyone watched. But she could also see that he had been humbled by the consequences of his own choices. Whether that humbling would lead to genuine change remained to be seen. I believe he's desperate, she said honestly. Whether that desperation leads to real transformation or just temporary compliance, only time will tell. My recommendation stands. Offer aid with strict oversight. Send a representative from Stormcrown to monitor the implementation of reforms, and make it clear that future support depends on demonstrable change, not just promises. So be it. Theron's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Silvermoon will receive the aid it needs to stabilize. Council Member Seren will serve as our representative to oversee the implementation of reforms. You have 6 months to demonstrate meaningful change. After that period, we will reassess. Fail to meet the conditions, and this council will revisit the question of whether Silver Moon should continue to exist as an independent pack. Caden bowed deeply. Thank you, Your Majesty. And Council Member Morwen, thank you for your mercy. I didn't deserve it. You didn't, Alara agreed coldly. But the other wolves in your pack do. Don't waste this opportunity. The delegation was dismissed, and as they filed out, Alara felt something release in her chest. The confrontation she had been dreading for 18 months was over, and she had faced it not as a rejected Omega begging for scraps, but as a council member with the power to shape her former pack's future. After the chamber cleared, Theron approached her. That was masterfully handled. You could have destroyed him. Instead, you chose justice over vengeance. Vengeance would have felt good for a moment, Alara admitted, but it wouldn't have helped anyone. This way, maybe something good comes from all the pain. You've become exactly what I hoped you would. Theron's voice was soft, but there was intensity in his silver eyes, strong, wise, and powerful enough to show mercy when others would choose cruelty. I had a good teacher. You had potential that needed the right environment to flourish. All I did was provide that environment. They stood there in the empty council chamber, and Alara became acutely aware of how close he was standing, how his presence made her pulse quicken, how something had been building between them for months that neither had acknowledged. Theron, she started, but he held up a hand. Wait. There's something I need to tell you, and I need to say it before I lose my courage. The Lycan King. Afraid? Alara tried to make it light, but her heart was racing. Terrified, he admitted. Alara, these past 18 months, watching you grow and transform and become the wolf you were always meant to be, it's been extraordinary. But somewhere in that process, something happened that I didn't anticipate. What? I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect and terrifying. You, Alara stammered. You're the Lycan King. You could have anyone. Why would you? Because you're brilliant and brave and you challenge me in ways no one else dares. Because you see me, not my title or my power, but who I actually am beneath all the authority and responsibility. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I can be Theron instead of always having to be the Lycan King. He stepped closer. I know you were rejected before. I know trusting someone with your heart again is asking a lot. But Alara, I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with political alliances or strategic advantage. It's messy and inconvenient and completely genuine. And if you don't feel the same way, I'll accept that and we'll continue as we have been. But I couldn't let another day pass without telling you the truth. Alara's mind was reeling. The Lycan King, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, was standing in front of her, confessing love like a nervous adolescent. It was absurd. It was impossible. It was exactly what she wanted. I was so afraid, she whispered. Afraid that if I let myself feel this, you'd reject me too. That I'd end up right back where I started, kneeling on cold stone while everyone watched me break. I would never. Theron's voice was fierce. Alara, you are the strongest wolf I know. You survived rejection, banishment, and rebuilt yourself into someone extraordinary. You sit on my council because you earned that position through dedication and intelligence. You are valued here not because of any bond, but because of who you are as a person. Then yes, Alara said, feeling tears start to fall even as she smiled. Yes, I feel the same way. I think I've been in love with you for months. I was just too scared to admit it." Theron pulled her into his arms, and when he kissed her, it felt nothing like the obligatory affection she had experienced with Caden. This was fire and recognition, and coming home to a place she had been searching for her entire life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Theron rested his forehead against hers. "This is going to complicate things. The council will have opinions. Other packs will gossip. Some will say you're only on the council because of our relationship. Let them talk," Alara said firmly. "I know what I've earned, and anyone who thinks otherwise can watch me prove my worth every single day." "That's my Luna," Theron said with a smile. Luna, the title she had been denied, the position Caden had told her she wasn't worthy of holding, and now the Lycan King himself was offering it to her, not as a political arrangement, but as a genuine partnership built on respect and love. The official mating ceremony was held 2 months later, under a full moon that seemed to shine just for them. Wolves from every pack in the Northern Territories attended, filling Stormcrown Hold to capacity. Alara wore robes of silver and blue, and when she walked into the ceremonial circle, she did so with her head held high and her shoulders back, every inch the Luna she had become. Theron waited for her at the center, looking at her with such open love and pride that she felt her breath catch. This was nothing like the ceremony with Caden. This was real. This was right. This was everything she had never known she deserved. The ceremony followed ancient traditions, with vows spoken before the moon goddess and the assembled witnesses. But when Theron spoke his vows, he added something unexpected. "I, Theron Stormcrown, Lycan King of the Northern Territories, take you, Alara Morwyn, as my mate and Luna. I vow to honor your strength, value your wisdom, and support your growth. I vow to build with you a kingdom where every wolf, regardless of their ranking or background, has the opportunity to become who they're meant to be. I vow to love you not because of what you can offer me, but because of who you are. And I vow to spend every day of my life proving that you made the right choice in accepting me." Alara's own vows were equally heartfelt. "I, Alara Morwyn, take you, Theron Stormcrown, as my mate and king. I vow to stand beside you, to counsel you honestly even when the truth is difficult, and to help you carry the weight of leadership. I vow to use whatever power I'm given to protect those who are vulnerable and value those who are dismissed. I vow to love you for who you are, beneath the crown, and to remind you of that person when the burden of rule threatens to make you forget. And I vow to prove every single day that the wolf everyone said wasn't good enough is exactly what you needed." When Theron marked her, claiming her as his mate before the entire assembly, the bond that formed between them was nothing like the weak connection she had felt with Caden. This was absolute, undeniable, a merging of souls that felt like destiny finally clicking into place. The celebration lasted 3 days, with wolves from across the territories coming to pay their respects to their new Luna. And when the delegation from Silver Moon arrived, led by Caden himself, Alara received them with grace and dignity. Caden bowed formally. "Luna Alara, on behalf of the Silver Moon Pack, I offer congratulations on your mating and gratitude for the second chance you granted us. The reforms are progressing well under Council Member Seren's oversight. We're becoming the pack we should have been all along." "I'm glad to hear it," Alara said, and genuinely she was glad, not for Caden's sake, but for all the wolves in Silvermoon who deserved better leadership. "If I may speak freely," Caden continued, "I owe you an apology that goes beyond politics and pack business. I was a fool. I had something genuine, and I threw it away for an alliance that was always going to fail because it was built on ambition instead of trust. You deserved better than how I treated you. Yes, I did, Elara agreed simply. But that rejection led me here, to this life, to this mate, to becoming who I was always meant to be. So in a strange way, you did me a favor by showing me I didn't belong in Silvermoon. I belonged somewhere I would be valued for my actual worth, not my political connections. Caden nodded, accepting the truth of her words. For what it's worth, you're going to be an extraordinary Luna. The Northern Territories are lucky to have you. After he left, Theron appeared at her side. How does it feel? What? Facing the Alpha who rejected you as an equal. No, more than an equal. As his superior. Elara considered the question carefully. It feels like closure. Like the final chapter of that part of my life is finished, and I can fully embrace this new one. She turned to look at her mate, this powerful king who had seen potential where others saw only a rejected Omega. No more looking backward, only forward. Forward, Theron agreed, pulling her close. Together. The years that followed proved Elara's worth beyond any doubt. As Luna, she championed reforms that protected vulnerable pack members across all the Northern Territories. She established training programs for wolves who wanted to develop skills regardless of their birth rank. She created council positions for Omegas and other traditionally dismissed wolves, ensuring diverse perspectives in governance. Under her influence, Theron's rule became known not just for its strength, but for its justice. Packs that had operated under old hierarchies began to change, recognizing that true power came from valuing all members, rather than just those at the top. And when Elara gave birth to twin daughters 5 years after her mating, she raised them with the understanding that their worth was inherent, not dependent on who they mated or what alliances they formed. She taught them to be strong and kind, powerful and compassionate, exactly the balance she had learned through her own painful journey. One evening, as she watched her daughters play in the garden while Theron dealt with territorial disputes in the council chamber, Elara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From rejected Omega to Luna of the most powerful territory in the north. From broken and humiliated to strong and respected. From believing she was worthless to knowing her own value so deeply that no one could ever make her doubt it again. As the sun set over Stormcrown Hold, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elara felt Theron's presence before she saw him. He emerged from the council chambers and came to sit beside her, gathering their daughters into his arms. They sat together in the garden, their daughters chattering about their adventures, and Elara thought about how different this life was from the one she had imagined. She had thought she would spend her life proving she was worth something. Instead, she had discovered that her worth had always existed. She just needed to find the place and the people who could see it. The rejected Omega, who everyone said wasn't good enough, had become the Luna who changed an entire kingdom. And every day she proved that the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of something extraordinary. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the catalyst that transforms you into who you were always meant to be. And sometimes the Alpha who rejects you is simply clearing the path for the king who will recognize your true value and spend the rest of his life making sure you never forget it. Elara had started her journey kneeling on cold stone, humiliated and broken. She ended it standing beside a king, powerful and loved and absolutely certain of her worth. The journey between those two moments had been painful and difficult and absolutely necessary. because she hadn't just survived her rejection. She had transformed it into the foundation of something greater than she had ever imagined possible. And that, she knew, was the real victory.